Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. My name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here. If we've never met, I'd just like to welcome you again this morning to Grace. It is a tent. We are here for a little while. We're kind of waiting on something to get approved so that we can get into our building, and so we'll do that soon. But one of the things we talk about here, and we firmly believe, it's that in our world, in our day and age, in which everybody seems to be building a platform to which they can stand on or have their voice heard, we think that Jesus Christ is the only foundation. And so while we're all seeking platforms, we really want to actually look for the true foundation which we can build our life upon. And so one of the ways that we do that is we actually open up God's heart. That's what we call the Bible. We see what his heart has to say about our heart. And that's the part of the gathering this morning that we're jumping into. And if you're new with us or if you just started coming, one of the ways we do that is through kind of like a long conversation or a long series around a topic or a section of the Bible. And so what we're doing this week is actually the second week in what will be a really pretty long, decent series for us through a discussion or a study of a letter that's found in the New Testament called 1 Peter. And so Peter, if you're not familiar with the Bible, you didn't grow up in church, Peter, his name was Simon Peter. He had the nickname Rock. He was one of Jesus' disciples, one of like the inner three. So kind of like always was with Jesus, saw what he did, heard what he said. And Peter is writing to a group of people much like you and me who are in a church full of a lot of different people. And he's writing to them not to correct something that they've done. He's not writing to them because there's like fighting going on in their midst and they need to stop and actually act like followers of Jesus. He's not writing to like tell them about the story of Jesus and the words of Jesus. He did that in another letter called the Gospel of Mark. Peter is writing to talk to a group of people and answer one question for them, and that's this: how do I follow Jesus here? I don't know if you've ever thought that. I don't know if you're asking that this week. We looked at this last week, and we said that this question really is an important question because oftentimes we can read the Bible at church or have it read to us. We can hear someone else's story, and we tend to think, that's great, good for you. I'm glad that's what Jesus does for you. Peter, I'm glad that you saw him. I'm glad that you had that whole thing where you walked on water with him for a little bit and then started to sink. Like, good for you, Peter. But what about me? How do I follow Jesus in 2024? How do I do that at my job with my kids or my illness or my life? How do I do that? How do I follow Jesus here? And we talked last week that this isn't an information question, that this is kind of like an application question. How do we do this? And if you haven't, or if you have the ability to, I would say, if you could go back and look at last week, if you have the opportunity, it would really set up for you the entire coming series. Because last week, the whole week, all we did was talk about a mindset that Peter introduces at the beginning of this letter. And so what he did last week is he said, listen, I'm not perfect. He's like, I'm not perfect. And because he's not perfect, we actually said that's kind of perfect for explaining. Because how to follow Jesus was something that he had to learn himself. And he sets up this mindset for this group of people. And he says, you got to understand that what you are, the way that you need to think, is that you need to think like an exile. So last week we said, hey, they had to see who they were. They were followers of Jesus. Peter called them chosen or the elect, talking about just like God's people in the Old Testament who were picked, not because they were great or perfect, but because God loved them. They're loved by God, and yet they live in the Roman Empire. And they're kind of stuck between these two worlds. And the way that we thought about this and the way that Peter talks about this in verse 1, he says, you're in exile. And we learned what that was and kind of walked through that tension. And that's really what we said. That little sliver of like following Jesus and living in the empire or the world in which we live, that's where the questions come up. That's where the tension is. That's where like all the confusion is. That's really where the rubber meets the road. That's where the temptation to go off and do something else. Like there's a lot of ways that you can live in that tension of exile. And we went through that last week. We said you could lash out. Man, you could opt out. You just check out. You could just kind of sell out. But we said what Peter's encouraging them to do in this book and encouraging you and I to do as we follow Jesus is to think like an exile. He says when we start to think like an exile, we'll actually stand out. Okay, and so what we're doing for the rest of our time together in this book is we're actually going to walk our way through it, and here's what we'll see, that in this tension, there's kind of these topics that come up and mindsets that come up that we need to think about and develop, and Peter is encouraging us to embrace if we're going to live as exiles, loving Jesus. And I understand not everyone who comes here may love Jesus. That's okay. You're allowed to be here for that. And so hopefully you try it on or check it out and see what it's about. And those of us who just started, maybe we'll learn something new. He said this loving Jesus and living in this world, that's a hard thing to do. And so this week, we're going to actually look at a title that we're just saying this: stability in an age of despair. And so Peter's saying one of the things about the exile experience and embracing the exile and living in those two worlds, as followers of Jesus, we're going to be known, we have the possibility to be known and to stand out when it comes to the topic and the idea of stability in an age of despair. He writes in 1 Peter 1, 3-5, here's what he says: "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time." It's getting kind of hot, so I'm just going to take this off real quick. Don't really know how to dress, right, for a tent. Hopefully that doesn't play music. There we go. All right. Stability. When you think about stability, I don't know about you, but I think first about an architect or an engineer. Like architects and engineers, when they're building skyscrapers, stability is a large concern for them. And the reason being, because if they're going to actually build something, you know very well that you can put something on paper and you can draw it up and you can plan it out. But when it comes to the reality of constructing it in this world, it has to be able to stand up to the forces of rain, of wind, of earthquakes. And so there are a lot of studies, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy given to constructing buildings that are stable. And if you are going to build something, you want it to be stable. And I was thinking about that this week. It's not just true of architecture, it's also true of our life and your life. If you and I want to construct a life that is able to withstand the reality of living in this world, stability is a big deal. And it's also becoming harder and harder to do. There's a story that's told of a business owner, and this business owner was looking for someone to manage his affairs. And so he put an ad out that said he would pay $1 million a year to someone who would be willing to take all of his worries and all of his cares. Well, an individual responded to that ad, as did many. And as this individual is getting through the hiring process and walking through all the hoops and the things and background checks that have to go on before this business owner hands over all of his estate, more or less, to this person, he found himself face to face with the owner. And the man applying for the job was asking questions, and the owner was asking questions. And the owner said, "Do you have any other questions or final questions for me?" And the man said, "Yes, I have one question." He said, "You're looking for someone to take over all your worries and all your concerns, and you're going to pay them $1 million a year. Do I understand that correctly?" And the business owner said, "Yeah, that's absolutely it." He said, "Well, my first question, really my only question is this: where is the $1 million going to come from? Like, do you have it?" And the business owner looked back at the man and said, "That is your first worry and concern." Right? Living in this world feels a lot like that. I don't know about you, but if you thought, like, I got to be building my life and my family and my job, and I've got to be concerned not only about how it's being built, but also of like where the funds are going to come from for me to do that. It's a lot, especially in a world that feels like it's coming apart at the seams. Writing about this in a study of human development, the UN does this every year, and this is 2021, 2022. The Human Development Study in Uncertain Times and Uncertain Lives It says this: together, uncertainty and insecurity are corroding social fabrics. This is the UN. More insecure people tend to trust others less. With insecurity increasing, it is not surprising that globally, less than 30% of people think that most people can be trusted. What's it saying? It's saying, hey, our stability and when it comes to trusting others, that's fallen apart. Talking about this economically, a German newspaper recently put this article out and says this: 2024, a year of political turmoil and economic uncertainty. Some of us already feel that. Some of us already see that. Talking about this, one social commentator on the internet, on X, used to be Twitter, or actually puts it this way, before we get there, the CDC, when it talks about physically, mentally, has these stats to say about the United States. Mortality rates among young adults are rising in the U.S. due in part to deaths of despair. 29% of girls, 57% of boys report persistent feeling of sadness or despair. Deaths of despair have grown 40% since 2000. I thought this one was interesting. In 2023, 19% of the population report clinical levels of anxiety as compared to 7.3% in 2009. And so a world in which we live and the reality of the pressures of this world is significant. Writing about this in the article, their X says this. One commentator says the pandemic, along with the climate crisis, has only compounded the harms wrought by racism, misogyny, transphobia, and classism, among other ills. We feel it. And if we're going to follow Jesus in this world, it's not like it's going to get any better. In fact, maybe some of you have heard, maybe some of us have grown up with the understanding of, oh, all those pressures exist for people who don't follow Jesus. If you follow Jesus, all of that is okay. And that's not true. That's not the reality. In fact, for many of us, that's the reality on top of the pressures of following Jesus. Writing about this in an article recently, one author says this about following Jesus in our culture. Says, man, I cannot read that. That's really tiny. It says, if you are on a college campus, the vast majority of students and professors are deeply convinced that we can be our own saviors, that we are inherently good, and that we have our own truth. And if you believe what the Bible teaches about the incarnation, the atonement, and grace, you are going to feel under enormous pressure. When you look for other students who believe as you do, you may discover that there are not so many. Stability in an age of despair. Well, why does Peter think that that's possible? What are we to do living in this tension with our questions, and how do we follow Jesus here? In the scripture that we read, Peter writes because he wants us to know, he wants you to know, he wants the people to he's writing to, living in the Roman Empire, following Jesus, trying to put it together. He wants them to know that for followers of Jesus, that there is access to something that is always certain and always secure. You say, everything? No. Followers of Jesus, not everything's secure and everything's certain. There is something that followers of Jesus have access to in the middle of exile that is always certain and always secure. And he calls it this. He calls it Christian hope. So for the rest of our time this morning, all I want to do is look into this Christian hope and see what do we mean and what does Peter mean when he says that in the midst of what we just talked about, the stability that we feel eroding around us, how we could be people who are learning to follow Jesus with a always certain and always secure hope. What is that? He says it's always certain. When we read what we read, you'll see that what he's actually pointing to is this, that Christian hope is a foundation in this life. A hope that is always certain is a foundation in this life. Notice he says, according to this great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Hope, when we hear the word hope in our culture, we tend to think of it as an I wish. Like, hey, I hope to see you there. I wish to see you there. Hey, I hope I get this job. I wish I get this job. Hey, I hope it stops raining. Like, I wish there would be some sun. That'd be great. I hope my kids get through school. Like, I wish them to do well. But when the Bible talks about hope, it doesn't mean that. In fact, this type of I wish culture is all throughout our society. In fact, whether it's Disney and you're old school, like Snow White, which someday my prince will come, like I hope my prince will come, or whether you're like Moulin Rouge, anyone remember that movie? It's not a trick question. Okay, don't raise your hand. We're still, like maybe if you saw that, the key protagonist in that says, one day I'll fly away. Hey, it's one day this thing's going to happen. I wish this thing would happen, or I wish I could be somewhere else. We tend to think about hope that way. But when the Bible talks about hope, and when Peter talks about hope, what he's actually talking about is something that is certain. So when he says hope, he's not saying maybe. He's actually talking about certainty. So hope for Peter, and hope for a follower of Jesus, Christian hope is different than the hope that we see in this world. Christian hope is not something to bet on. It's something to build upon. And not saying, hey, what are the chances? It's something that's going to happen in the future that actually informs your today. It can hold weight. In other words, how you live as a follower of Jesus in that tension and in that exile, Peter's actually saying, will mirror whether or not you understand that you have a Christian hope. That there is something true, certain about tomorrow, and because you know that thing about tomorrow or the future is certain, you actually apply that to your life today. That's a hard discipline to understand. One of the best illustrations I ever heard about it is this idea of working somewhere. So maybe you've heard this before if you've been around Grace Church for any amount of time. Or if you've just heard it out there, because it's a great illustration. If I told you your job was to work in a grueling factory under conditions in which there is no AC, it was going to be hot, you were going to work 12-hour shifts, okay, with very little break, you're going to be on your feet most of the time, and at the end of the year, I'm going to pay you $10,000. You're going to have an attitude about working in that factory, a certain attitude. If I told you that at the end of the year, you're going to make $10 million, we're going to have a different attitude. In fact, imagine if there was someone working in the factory for $10,000, working along someone in the factory for $10 million. You're going to approach that job very differently. $10,000, you're going to be like, forget this. I can go somewhere else and do this. $10 million, you're going to be like, it's not that bad. It's okay. $10,000, man, it is hot. I kind of like the heat. $10,000, you're like, I'm on my feet all the time. At least I don't have to exercise. What's the difference? It's not the job. It's not the environment. It's not the situation. It's the knowledge of what is coming in the future. For $10 million, I'll do it. For $10,000, I'm out. Because what is certain in the future is being applied to today. It's interesting, in 2018, I missed this. I'm not sure, maybe you caught it. There was an art installation in New York. And the title of that art installation was Hope or Anxiety. And the artist was saying what we all know, that both hope and anxiety have to do with the future. And they both have to do with uncertainty. Hope applies the certainty of the future to today. Anxiety applies the uncertainty of the future to today. They're just applications of different things. And so this artist actually invited people on the street to come up and grab a tag, and all it said at the top of the tag was, I am hopeful today about, and they could fill it in, and they would put it on the blue wall. And then if you could also grab a tag that said, I am anxious today about, and you can put it on the red wall, and they could see what was filled and what was on there. You can go online, you can read it. It's fascinating. It's also not surprising. This artist, not a follower of Jesus, by the way, secular artist, puts this art installation, travels around, gets great fame for it, becomes very popular. It's now permanently housed in this museum. Here's what this artist wrote about the installation. Okay, listen to her words. Not a follower of Jesus. Listen to what she says. We live in a uniquely unsettled moment of technological, political, and social flux. Awash in endless currents of information delivered by glowing screens, each new headline brings a fresh opportunity for faith or despair, depending upon our attitude and philosophies.
By definition, anxiety and hope are determined by a moment that has yet to arrive. Now look at what she says. My emphasis, not hers. But how often do we pause to fully consider our relationship with the future? What's Peter saying? He's saying exactly what this artist is saying. He's trying to get people who are exiles, who are caught in the between, to try to figure out how to follow Jesus, to apply a fact about their future today. You say, well, what fact is he trying to get them to understand? Look at what he says. Born again to a living hope, what? Through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Now, if you grew up in church, you're like, oh yeah, Easter. But this isn't just Easter, this is every day. What Peter is trying to get his people to understand, and the followers of Jesus to understand in that moment, is that following Jesus actually has a lot to do with applying the resurrection of Jesus to our life today. You see, it's not just some theory in their mind. It was a fact in which they would embrace. The idea that Jesus was alive made a difference to them. The fact that there's a guy who lived on this world, walked this world, had a relationship with God unlike anybody else, taught and did things unlike anyone else, died and came back to life, should inform how we live today. That's what he's actually saying. Writing about this, a guy named N.T. Wright, in his book, Hope, writes it this way. He wrote this book called Surprised by Hope. He says, really, there's three philosophies in this world. There's three things that we all, whether we're followers of Jesus or not, put our hope in. He says the first philosophy is this: it's progress. It's this picture of the guy climbing the ladder or climbing the stairs. It's I'm going to get ahead. Tomorrow's going to be better than today. I'm going to keep moving. It's get up in the morning. It's drink all the water you can. Make sure you get your ounces in. Make sure you get your steps in. Make sure you're always advancing. Make sure you're bettering yourself. Cutting out all the negativity. It's get better, get better, get better. That there are people who live with that certainty. Tomorrow's going to be better than today. I'm going to get there. That's what he's saying is one philosophy. Now, another philosophy, he says the second one is this: it's escape. Tomorrow's not going to be better than today. I need to get out of here. I need a vacation. I need to unplug. I need to relax. I need to rest. I need some self-care. I need a massage. I need a cup of coffee. I need to treat myself, right? It's kind of that idea. Now, listen, is he saying that both of those are wrong? No, he's saying both of those are hopes that people put their mind. In fact, I was thinking through this. I don't know about you, but I can go through my calendar and tell you which time of year and what. I just bounce back and forth between progress and escape. I can do better. I got to get out of here. I can try harder. Things are going to be better. Oh, man, that island in the sun is looking awesome, right? I got to get escape. Just bouncing. Some of us, many of us, the week is just progress followed by a weekend of escape. That's how we live. Progress, escape, progress, escape, progress, escape. Now, what he's saying and what N.T. Wright actually says and what he's aiming at, what Peter's trying to get at, is followers of Jesus, by the way, don't live by those two. There are Christian versions. Just because you Christianize and put Jesus on it doesn't mean it's better. Right? The Christian better progress is believe in yourself. God loves you. Do better. Try harder. It'll be fine. Christian better progress. Christian view of escape is I just need to take some rest, get alone, journal, bounce back and forth. Our hope, he's saying, as a Christian, is not that tomorrow's just going to be better or that tomorrow's going to be awful and I got to get away. He said the actual Christian hope, when you look at it, is this third one, which he calls resurrection. It's this idea not that everything tomorrow is going to be great or that everything tomorrow is going to be bad, but that one day everything will be restored and made new by God, which allows us to look at tomorrow and actually call it bad if it's bad. We don't have to live like, And it also allows us to look at tomorrow and say, we should care about today and this world because of what has already begun in Jesus Christ. You see, when Christians were being fed to lions, when they were being persecuted, when they were being burned at the stake, if you were to walk up to them and tell them, hey, everything's going to be all right. Don't worry. I know the fire's hot, and I know the lion's hungry. And if you looked at them and said, remember, Jesus said, love each other. That wouldn't help them. They're like, okay, thanks. Remember, thou shalt not kill. Okay, thank you. Remember, Jesus did some miracles. Okay. What gave them hope and strength to endure that was you walked up to somebody next to somebody who's about to be eaten or devoured by fire and look at them and say, Jesus is alive. Because if Jesus is alive after everything they did to him, then nothing that you can do to me is going to make a difference. Job in the Old Testament puts it this way. He says, though he slay me, talking about God, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Is that progress? No. Is that escapism? No. That's the resurrection. Now, what we tend to do, and here's just what I know as a pastor, what you and I tend to do is we tend to think about the resurrection as the end. Yeah, one day, someday, at the end, Jesus is going to make everything. What Peter is talking about is putting it as a starting point. See, we tie our eternity to the resurrection. We do not actually tie our today to it. I'll tie one day, someday to it. Yeah, one day that's going to happen. But I don't actually apply it to this moment today. You see, the hope of the resurrection is not just simply that we're going to get new bodies. It's that illness and suffering and injustice and wrong and evil will all be made new again and all undone. He's saying there's a certainty that ought to inform the way that we live. In other words, the hope that he's talking about is not some consolation prize. Like, hey, you did great living through the hard part of life. Here you go. Here's a big stuffed animal of Jesus. Welcome to heaven. That's not how it works. He's not talking about hope that's a life raft. He's actually saying it's a compass by which you can chart a course in your life through. Writing about this, a guy named Viktor Frankl, you can't really talk about hope without talking about this guy. He was a Jewish psychologist. And he was actually taken by the Nazi invasion. He was taken away to a concentration camp, and he's by trade, he's a researcher. He's going to study human psychology, and so that's what he does in the concentration camp. And in this concentration camp, he observed people taken with everything in their life taken from them without a foundation. And so he began to ask the question, what is a foundation in life? What is it that actually causes some people to do okay? And by okay, we mean okay in a concentration camp. And what is it that causes some people just to die? And he wrote about it in this book, Man's Search for Meaning. A Jewish philosopher, he's a Jewish psychologist. So he's not coming from a Christian perspective, but he looks at it, and here's what he says. He says the difference is hope. He's written extensively on this. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. He writes this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Usually, talking about a concentration camp, usually it began one morning when the prisoners simply refused to get dressed or wash or go out to the parade grounds for inspection. They had given up. Nothing bothered them anymore because they had no hope. He keeps writing. He says this. He says, maybe, click it again. No. Yep, there we go. Life in a concentration camp tears open the soul and exposes its depths and its foundations. Life only has meaning. This is Viktor Frankl. Life only has meaning if we have a hope and a meaning that suffering and even death cannot destroy. What's he saying? He's saying there needs to be a hope. And it's not just simply a hope in a one day, someday pie in the sky thing. He's saying that there is a foundation. Hope acts as a foundation for this world. And, by the way, what Peter is offering and saying is the same thing. He's saying it's always certain. It's something that is always certain. He goes, it's also always something that is always secure. And so when Peter talks about this security, he's pointing to the same thing that Viktor Frankl is saying and saying, listen, this always secure hope, that's this next line, means this, that Christian hope can't be touched by this life. Christian hope, it's a foundation in this life, and it's something that can't be touched in this life. What do you mean? Well, look at what he says. According to this great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope. What does he mean by living hope? Not a dead hope. Notice he's not talking about a quantity of hope here. He's not saying, how much hope do you have? That's not the question. It's not the statement. He's not saying, hey, he's caused us to be born again to a lot of hope. He's saying he's to be born again to a living hope. It's a qualitative statement. He's not saying, how much hope do you have? He's not someone he's asking. He's saying, what type of hope do you have? What is the quality and what is the character and what is the nature of the hope that you have? It is a hope that can die. Can it die? Can it perish? Is it vulnerable? Or is it a hope that lives, that lasts, that's durable? That's what he's actually getting at here. And he wants them to understand this. Tim Keller, writing about this in his book, Hope in Times of Fear, says that there are basically 5 categories for things that are qualities of hope or qualitative hope, things you can put your hope in. He says health, your good health, you're exercising, you're eating things right, you're taking vitamins. I'm not saying all that's bad, but he's like, hey, at least I got my health. Family, your children, your loved ones, your support, professional achievement, what you've done, fortune or lack of fortune, money, or position in society. He's saying all of us, everyone. By the way, this isn't a Christian thing. If you're not a follower of Jesus here, right? I'm actually just talking about everyone has hope. Everybody who lives in this world has a hope. It's either one of these 5 things or something else. And what Tim Keller's getting at, and what Peter's getting at by a living hope, is that at some point in time in your life, when you encounter difficulty, your hope will be challenged. And if your hope is in fortune, and you lose your fortune, where's your hope? If your hope is in family, and that is taken away, or your kids disappoint you, what do you have left? If your hope is in your achievement, and you lose your job, and that's threatened, where are you going to be? You might be thinking about Viktor Frankl and the concentration camp thing, and when I read that, I don't know about you, but I'm like, that's extreme. Like, that's extreme. But if you think about a concentration camp for a minute, what is it? Well, you're like, it's horrible. But what is it? It is the systematic deprivation of all of those things on Tim Keller's list all at once. Your health is threatened, your fortune's gone, your achievement's gone, your security and position in society are gone, and your family's out there. It's taken from you. Albeit very instantly. But if you think about it, at the end of this life, when you and I finally breathe our last, all of that's taken from us then too. All a concentration camp is the focusing in of everything that threatens you and I on a daily basis, in an instant, in a moment, in one sitting, albeit by an evil, heinous entity, but all at once. And all their hope was taken away. Hope has to be stable, like our tent. It has to be durable. Listen, I thought this week, man, I was like, we're just sailing. That's all we're doing. We're on a giant sailboat outside through the entire year. Someone's got to batten down the hatches and hoist the mainsail. That's what we're doing. It's got to be durable. It has to last. It has to stand up to time. There's a poet, actually my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson. She writes this in a poem. She says, hope is a thing with feathers. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Now, isn't that lovely? Don't you just hear that and go, oh yeah, hope is a thing with feathers. It's like a bird. Someone who's been through a lot actually wrote this poem in response to Emily Dickinson's poem. I brought it with me. The poem's entitled, Hope is Not a Bird, Emily, It's a Sewer Rat. Hope is not a bird, Emily, it's a sewer rat. Here's what the author writes. It's what thrives in the discards and survives in the ugliest parts of our world, able to find a way to go on when nothing else can ever find a way in. What are they saying? What are they actually getting at? They're saying hope's not some cute thing. that you write on a greeting card. Whatever your hope is in, it's got to be able to crawl through the sewer. It's got to go through the ugly parts of life. It's got to weather the storm. And what Peter's saying is that you and I have a hope that is not just singing songs, but something that can actually go through something. Look at what he says in verse 4. He says this, we've been born again to a living hope, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. In other words, it can't break, spoil, or fade. All of those things are what happen in this life. Everything that can break, spoil, or fade, that's this life. It can take anything. And what Peter's saying is there's actually something not like that. Recently, my family and I, we went to Sparkles roller skating rink, and if you were born in the 80s, some of you were, or if you lived through the 80s, that was it. There's no internet, so you went skating. Everybody's birthday party was at Sparkles, right? And so as a child of the 80s and now a parent with kids who are doing a skating party, I thought, that's awesome. And my kids started learning this, and one of my sons said, I want rollerblades, which warmed my heart because I rollerbladed in 1999. That was really cool. And I had K2s. Anyway, I had these great rollerblades. They were pretty sweet. And so they're still in the basement. And I'm like, oh man, I should go get them out again and show them to them. So I go down to the basement. I find my rollerblades. Some of you are like, you got to get rid of stuff. Let things go, man. I know, I have to. But I got my rollerblades right next to my skis, by the way. Right, I pull my rollerblades out. I open them up and I pull them out. And the plastic is brittle and they're rusted. Now I'm like, these things they've not been submerged underwater. They've just aged. I looked at that and I'm like, that's why I feel so tired in the morning, because that's happening to me. But I look at these skates and I was thinking, oh man, maybe my kid could have these and maybe I could give them to him one day and he could use them. And I'm like, nobody's using these because they faded, they spoiled, and they decayed. You see, every inheritance that we hand down, think about it, he says to an inheritance. What does it mean to have an inheritance? An inheritance is something that is promised to you that you don't fully possess. It's something that is rightfully yours today. It's rightfully yours, yet you don't possess it yet. It's actually, an inheritance is a promise inside a relationship. That relationship is a family relationship, and it's a promise based on relationship. Because you are in my family, because you are in relationship with me, there's something certain about your future, which you don't possess yet, which is coming today. That's what he's talking about is true of followers of Jesus. It's a promise that's in relationship. Notice he says it's an inheritance, by the way, kept in heaven for you, who by God's power are being guarded through faith. Look at what he says. It's ready. It's ready. This word ready here means nothing needs to be added to it. It's already complete. He's saying there's something that followers of Jesus have in the middle of exile, in the middle of tension, that is certain and it's secure. It's not like God's building it. He's not building it. It's done. It's ready. Some of you remember when Amazon Prime first came out, right? Amazon Prime, next day delivery. Everything was next day. Now, logistic, COVID, blah, blah, few days, right? You pay some money, it's going to come in a few days. But if you've ever ordered anything off Amazon, they send you a tracking number and you can get on and you track it. That's what you do. Is it here yet? It's going to be here by 8. It's going to be here by 9. Sometimes they're delivering at 10 p.m. 10 p.m., boom. It's like a body's on your doorstep. No, it's a box. It came from Amazon. You knew it was coming because you've been looking at it all day. And we live in a day and age when they don't deliver, you're like, what? We're offended. We're like, it didn't get here. Why? Because it said it was shipped. Do you know this? Amazon, if you're on Prime and you start looking for something, they'll begin shipping it to you before it even gets to your house. They'll send it to a logistics center based on the number of clicks that you've observed it, because they can predict that it's coming. Peter's saying this. He's saying there is an inheritance, something promised in the relationship with God that is secure. It's ready. It's already started shipping in your life. So live and act as if it's shipped, right? If it's shipped, you're not sitting there going, why isn't it moving? Why isn't it moving? Why isn't it moving? You get the notification. They made this notification because they got tired of calls of people going, where's my package? They're like, we got to give them something that says it's coming. It's on its way. And Peter is giving you and me a notification that is saying, hey, guys, you live and act and live. And how do I follow Jesus in the tension? You live because you know that something is already shipped in your life. You say, what is that? Well, it's that salvation. It's not money. It's not crowns. It's not jewels. It's not virgins in heaven. That's not how that works. It is a salvation. And notice he says this. He says, it's kept in heaven for you who are by God's power are being guarded through faith for a salvation. Notice, he's not saying, hey, he's not saying there's a reward someday for you and God's keeping the reward safe. That's not all he's saying. See, other religions, other people, they say the hope is compensation. It's not compensation. It's resurrection, salvation. Notice, it's not just God's got something that he's keeping safe for you. What else is God doing? He's keeping you safe for it. Salvation isn't, oh, if I try real hard and I live real good, then one day, someday, God's got something saved for me. Salvation is God has got me. And because he's got me, one day, someday, I will see him. See, the Christian hope is not, oh, I hope it's going to work out. Or I'm certain someday something's coming. The Christian hope is not, oh my goodness, I've got Jesus. The Christian hope is Jesus has me in the midst of that. It's secure. It's not going anywhere. This is all throughout the Old Testament. It's all throughout the security idea. It's all throughout the Bible. Writing about this, David, who's a guy who wrote poetry and songs, in Psalm 130, he says this, I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits for him. And in his word I will put my hope. Isaiah 8:17, writing to a group of people who are going through some very difficult things, says, I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face from the descendants of Jacob. It feels like I can't see him. Yet I will put my trust in him. It's understanding that there's a relationship with a God who is alive. Peter's saying, how do I follow Jesus here in my life? How do I follow Jesus in my illness? How do I deal with the tension? How do I deal with all of that? I have something that is always certain, something that is always secure. Now, maybe you're sitting here and you're like, okay, that's good for you. You're a pastor. You're supposed to say all that. But how about you? But I look around and I don't see a lot of people living that. Maybe you say, like, I've been in church. I don't see a lot of people believing that or trusting in that. That's the word we'd use. Maybe you're here and you're like, yeah, that's great, but I don't have that. I don't have that. What would you say to me? And I would say, I would agree with you. I would agree with you. That when I look at living in this world and those who've called to follow Jesus, I see a lot of times where we don't live that way. Where I don't believe that in my life. I'll tie my eternity to Jesus, but I don't tie my today to Jesus. Or I don't act as if I have that. I'm not constructing my life if I have that. And some of that is because, honestly, just straight up, when you look around, there are people who are just living like the world's getting uncertain. I'm just going to put the pedal to the floor. Like, everybody used to have a bucket list, and a bucket list is what you did before you died, right? The bucket list is just a list now. That's all it is. Forget the bucket. Now it's just a list because people are going, how can I do everything that I need to do, put the money where I need to put it, get everything set up. I'm just going to go as hard as I can for as long as I can because I don't know what's coming next. Yeah. Some of us, we don't live that way. We just try one thing after the next because we don't believe this. We don't have this. Maybe we don't see it around us. I'm just going to keep trying. And what we've had is maybe you've lived long enough. We've lived long enough so that we climb a certain ladder or a certain thing, and that doesn't work. And so then we go to another ladder, and we try that. So maybe you tried education or school or a job or a career in one and just not working out. And when I think about that, man, I was thinking about that this week, and I just thought about this image of a caterpillar. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen a caterpillar in the wild, but like they'll climb up things. They just climb up things. They climb up trees, sticks. They're looking for food. And have you ever seen a caterpillar like climb up a branch or a stick and you're looking at it and the stick doesn't finish, it's just like a short little twig, right? So the cat, you're like, good luck, buddy, there's nothing up there. Caterpillar doesn't know. Gets to the end, what does the caterpillar do? Have you seen it? It's like, it's reaching. It's like, Where's the next thing? And you're like, it's not there, man. So then what do you do? It goes, nope, it goes back down, inches over, finds the next stick, also this high, and goes, gets, feel. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing. Many of us, relationships, marriages, jobs. We think something's our hope. We climb up the hope of finances or family. We get to the top, feel around, nothing's there, go back down. It's not it. Maybe it's personal success. Maybe it's some other thing. I was thinking about that, and I have kids. If you have kids, you've read them this book. It's The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And every day he eats something and he's still hungry, and I realized that's the same illustration. That we're all just the very hungry caterpillar. That we're all just eating whatever our world has to offer, and we don't have hope, and we're not satisfied because it doesn't last and it's not certain. There is a way, by the way, right? There is a way for that caterpillar actually to get up off the stick. You know that, right? I know that. What is it? It's not by finding a new stick. It's not by climbing. What has to happen in that caterpillar's life for him to get above the ground and the life of trying to find he's got to be changed. He's got to transform, right? There's some change that has to happen in him for that to occur. Peter, by the way, says the exact same thing is true for you and me as followers of Jesus, if you're a follower of Jesus. It's not try something new. It's not switch from finances to family. It's not try the Christian version of self-fulfillment. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, how do you get this certainty? How do you get this security? How is it yours in the midst of exile? Where does it come from? Look at what he says. You have to be born into it. Can't earn it. Can't try it. He says, according to God's great mercy, God has caused us to be born again to a living hope. There has to be a transformation that happens inside of you that God does to you. We would call that the good news of Jesus. Trusting in what God has done, not in what I am doing. You know, the Bible says that for those who put their trust in Jesus, not only is the fact that Jesus is alive, but they will be alive because he's alive. And it's not because I'm so good, but because that happened to him, and I'm with him, and he's with me. Because God looks at you and me through Jesus when we put our trust in him. He doesn't see our past. He actually sees our future. And God deals with you and I not on our past, but on our future because of Jesus. We live out of the past. We live out of the fact that we were sinners and we were awful, which we were, by the way. But when God does something to you and in you, he actually changes and supplies you with a different hope. Paul puts it this way, writing to a church in Ephesus, he says this, remember that at the time you were separated from Christ, talking about before we knew God, excluded from the citizens of Israel and foreigners to the covenants and the promise. We didn't grow up in religion. We didn't grow up with all the stuff and all that promise and all that love and all that stuff. We were apart from it. He says, without hope and without God in the world. By the way, what's he saying is this, the despair that we feel apart from Jesus is real. There is despair. It's not a figment of our imagination. It's not just the fact that we feel bad. It's actually there apart from God. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. What he's saying is this, that when Dante wrote his famous work, Dante's Inferno, it says, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, and he put that over the doorway of hell. Paul's saying there's a sense in which that should be over the doorway of every maternity and delivery ward in this world apart from God. That when we are born into this world, there's a sense in which, apart from God, we are born into a place of despair and hopelessness. Yes, family. Yes, money. Maybe personal achievement. Something. But none of that will last. We're all born into that. And what we need desperately is for Jesus to bring us into another birth, a spiritual birth in Christ. And that for those who hope in Christ, there is a certainty and a security that cannot be taken away. So you might find yourself climbing this morning. You might find yourself stranded. What I am asking you to do this morning and inviting you to, and what Peter is urging them to do, is not climb another twig of religion. It's to come to Jesus and be changed. It's to tie your life to him. And if you're like, hey, I've already done that, then it's, let's actually tie not just my future of my salvation to him and my eternity to him, but tie my family to him and my kids to him and my life to him today. And so as the band comes up, I want to ask you a question. What is your hope? As you live maybe in the tension, trying to follow Jesus, knowing that he loves you, and yet living in this world, and you're enduring all kinds of stuff, is it certain? And is it secure? Or have you just tied yourself to something that when it goes away too? Just thinking about it, Pastor, what does it actually mean for people and for a community of people to get this? What would that be like? Well, I think it means that we are not only just enabled to go through suffering, but I think it is what Peter says. There's stability in the midst of suffering, stability in the midst of uncertainty. That there's something about your life that does not change and can't be taken, it can't be touched. It's interesting when you look at the early church, they understood this, they got this. They were actually persecuted. They were put to death. They were actually drug out into the Colosseum in Rome, where Peter's writing this from. He's writing to them from a city in which people were put to death in crowds with them cheering because they claimed Jesus. And it's interesting, the early Christian community literally took the bodies of those people who were killed, and they would bury them under the Colosseum in what we now call the catacombs. You know, the idea of an underground church, this was actually underground. They went underground, and they would take the bodies of these dead Christians who were killed by lions or thrown in the gladiators. They would bury them in the catacombs. And back then, they would actually put pictures next to the graves, and they draw images and icons in the walls. Do you know what the most common icon is in the catacombs? It's not a cross. It's an anchor. It's an anchor. If you go to Rome today, you can see them. They're all over. They're putting the bodies of people who suffered and died for following Jesus into the wall. And next to them, they're putting an anchor. Why is that? It's hope. Jesus is alive. He's alive today. Because Jesus is alive, you will always be alive, no matter what this world throws at you. There's a verse in Hebrews that says this: we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner Jesus has entered on our behalf. What's that mean? It means an anchor goes where you can't not. It goes all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. I can't go down there, I'll drown. But the anchor goes down there, and as long as there's a rope tied to it, I don't move here. Jesus has gone where you cannot go. Straight to God, perfect, acceptable, so we could tie our life to him. One hymn writer put it this way, and this is how we're ending. It says this: our God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast, and our eternal home. We're exiles, living in the tension and the pressure, tossed back and forth by the uncertainty, yet tied to the security of Jesus Christ. Let's go to him now. Let's do that. Father, we thank you for this morning, for the truth that is in your word, and the reminder that Peter tells us, like, how do we follow you here? Lord, I know we as people, I know there are people here who know you, who claim you, who have tied their life to you, and yet the mixture of living in this world combined with internal suffering and anxiety is pushing against them. And so, Lord, I pray today that you would remind us that we have an anchor. Lord, for the people who are here and we've just tied our life to everything else but you, and today, maybe for the first time this morning, are going, man, I need to be born again into your hope. Not to climb a new thing and, hey, I'm trying the Jesus thing, but to actually have an encounter with a living God. Lord, I pray that they would come to you and tie their life to you. Lord, thank you for the promise that you have us. We don't have you. You've got us. Lord, may we actually live out of that, not just for eternity, but for today. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.